Welcome to Your Mind is Trying to Kill You podcast. Join your host, Alexandros and co-host Vincent Byrne as they walk you through the deepest recesses of the mind and how it operates. They discuss all the reasons why our minds persistently get in the way of our evolution, growth, and our success. But crucially, they also teach you what you can do to change your destiny. And now, here's your host, Alexandros.
Okay, and welcome everybody to the first episode of Your Mind is Trying to Kill You podcast with your host Alexandros Megas and co-host Vincent Byrne. Vincent, what do you think about this?
I think it's really exciting. I think having taken your course and been really curious about what you came up with as to how our minds work and how they might be self-defeating. I think the fact that our conversation led to the creation of this podcast is we kind of birthed something that we didn't expect. So I'm good for this and excited by what we're going to discover.
Perfect. So let's start by explaining what it is that, first, before we get there, let's talk briefly about who we are, right? I'm Alexandros Megas. I'm a hypnotherapist. And for those of you who don't know what that is, it's a hypnotist that uses hypnosis for therapeutic purposes. And for those of you who don't know what hypnosis is or have misunderstood version of what hypnosis is from watching too many movies, we will get down and explain exactly all the modalities that this kind of practice is made of. And you, my friend?
Yes, well, my name is Vincent Byrne and I'm based in Dublin, and I've been a coach for the last 10 years and I'm predominantly working with business owners. But the reason why I became a coach after being a consultant before that was because I became fascinated by why people behave the way they did in the running of their businesses, and why even when you help them fix the problem, that they went back and did it again. So that's what took me into psychology and energy therapies and even touched on hypnosis. But and that's why I'm fascinated by this, and I probably have lots of stupid questions that I'm going to ask, but they're the ones that maybe the people listening want to ask too.
I love stupid questions. They're the best questions.
Well, you'll get a lot of them.
They are the most honest questions. So let's get down to why it is that we named this podcast Your Mind is Trying to Kill You. And I have a little story for that. So I was talking to my friend Vincent here about some stuff that he was going through. He couldn't step into and dissolve certain obstacles that were presented in front of him. And using this expression, I was in a very dramatic way attempted to show him that your mind, as it is in its default state, is not very helpful to you. And so I said, you got to understand, my friend, your mind is trying to kill you. And that is what birthed the name of this podcast, which I believe is very, very appropriate, as it is catchy. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. You certainly got my attention when you made that statement, because like most of what I'd have heard before was that because of old programming and because of things that we've been told to do and not to do, that in some way informs our behavior later in life. And And certainly that would have been my experience, and the kind of issues that you were helping me with reflected that. So, but it was still a, uh, a shot between the eyes to hear that my mind actually might be trying to kill me. So it was quite an interesting explanation, and maybe you'd share that with everyone else as to what exactly you mean by that.
I will be delighted to explain exactly what this is about. For the purposes of this podcast, I would say that the mind is made of parts, two main parts, one of which is the subconscious mind, the other one is the conscious mind. What are those guys? The conscious mind is what we use in our everyday awareness. For example, I'm talking to you right now, you're talking back to me, we are communicating, we know what we're experiencing, and we are, as we say, conscious, right? Versus being unconscious. People, when they talk about being unconscious, right, what are they referring to? The fact that that part of their mind that is on their everyday dealings with the world is no longer on. That's what happens when you're unconscious. However, I would say that we primarily are unconscious most of the time. We just don't know that. And it's because we don't know how the mind really functions. Does this make sense?
Yeah, so is it a little bit like the image that you would see of an iceberg, where you've got the 10% above and the 90% below, where you don't see what's going on below, but that's actually what's doing all the driving and doing all the influencing. The 10% you can see above water is the conscious mind that's really reacting to that. Would that be fair?
Sure, that's a really good analogy. The subconscious mind is, well, we're getting down to it pretty fast. The subconscious mind is the programming of a computer. So if we accept that the mind is a computer, the subconscious mind is the programming of the computer, and the conscious mind, I would say, in my view, is the monitor. So in the conscious mind, you see the behavior that has been programmed within the subconscious mind in all the years that we're alive. So the idea here is that the programming that goes in there, that let's agree to say that it starts at birth, although I would argue that it goes further back, but let's just, for the purposes of this right now explanation, say that it starts at birth. What
So,
it does then, it starts with a clean slate.
so it's like you've got your new laptop, and all it's got is Windows or OS, Mac OS loaded on before you start putting any programs in.
That's right. That's exactly what it is. So what it does then is that subconscious mind that turns on at that moment and never turns off, because it's kind of like the black box that you would find on an airplane that records everything. So, and people are bewildered sometimes when they hear that, if I were to put you into a deep hypnotic state and ask you how many steps did it take today to go from your bedroom to your bathroom, you would know what that answer is. So we do know pretty much everything there is to know about our lives. It's just that it is convoluted because it's all jumbled up information that has been accumulating there since birth. And we don't, in our default state, if we don't deliberately go in there and make sense out of these things, it will be like a bunch of tape that has been kind of like
Oh, the old reel to reel tapes kind of thing.
right, yes.
Yeah.
So a big mess of this tape kind of like being convoluted, and altogether this is just as most information is gathered in our subconscious mind, because that's what it does. It just keeps on gathering, accumulates information. And then when it thinks it might need something, it just goes in there trying to make sense out of whatever it can find in the fastest way possible to just use this. In other words, oh, I need that information now. What do I do if someone pulls a gun on me? And then, you go down the rabbit hole of what it is that you have recorded that might match this kind of situation, and to the best of its abilities trying to help you out. Unfortunately, that's not how it ends up most of the time.
So if I was someone who was trained in defending myself from someone who pulls a gun on me, and I had gone through routines of diving out of the way or whatever I might be taught, that if I had done it well enough, is that programming the subconscious to behave in a way that is likely to keep me safe? And then I would then be able to react automatically, in effect, without thinking, to respond to that situation. So that would be the difference between me before being trained, where I wouldn't know what to do, or I do something stupid that gets me shot, or something that I may have been trained to do in response to pulling a gun on me, which might actually save my life.
Absolutely. This is 100% of how it is. As a matter of fact, most people are not aware of the fact that you can't learn anything unless you are able to be hypnotized. You see, because we hypnotize ourselves all the time. We fall into trances all the time. Many people that I've told that to, they were bewildered by this, because people are like, oh, they come to you and like, oh, you can't. I'm not hypnotizable. To which I reply, if you're not hypnotizable, then you're not able to learn, right? Because this is where all the learning happens, goes. When you keep on repeating things, right? They said that repetition is the mother of knowledge. And the reason for that is every time you repeat something, the subconscious puts another layer of it into making it concrete. And on that, I will actually put a parenthesis there just to bring in an element that a lot of people are so into these days, and yet they don't understand why it happens. When you use affirmations, right? People love affirmations these days, right?
Yeah.
So when you use affirmations, this is what you do. You keep on repeating this same statement over and over again, hoping that it will stick and you will believe it. Why do you hope that you might believe it? Because you need to believe it in order for it to become your reality. And in this sense, I hope that makes sense. Everything we do, everything we are because of what our subconscious thinks. So that's why it's so crucial. It is so important to be able to interfere and influence our subconscious in a way that is conscious. In other words, we have to try and find ways to communicate in a conscious way to the subconscious. And we can only do that if we know the tricks of how to access it, because those two guys, the conscious mind and the subconscious mind, where psychology puts it, the adult and the child, don't talk to each other, right? Because one represents logic and rational thinking, and the other represents emotion, which, those two things, of course, are exactly diametrically opposite. And they are, because of that, in many respects, you would say those two guys are enemies. They don't like one another, and so they don't communicate. And so they attack a problem in their own way. Like your conscious mind might want to attack an obstacle in a certain way, and your subconscious mind would have a different way of approaching that. Now, if you don't find a way to put those forces on the same path, rather than one trying to extinguish the other, you're going to have trouble, and obstacles will not be able to be overcome the proper way. And the proper way is by learning, that making everything that happens when we overcome an obstacle a learning experience versus a trauma, which is what happens in most cases.
Yeah, that's really interesting because it reminds me of a book that I read a few years ago. I think it was called Bounce by a. He's now a Guardian journalist, but his name is Matthew Syed, and he was on the British table tennis team in the Olympics, and he tells the story of how he he was number one or number two in the world, and he was fancied to get the gold medal in the Olympics. And when he got to, I think it was only the second round, he came up against a guy who was he should have easily beaten, but he found himself becoming completely overwhelmed by the occasion and what was going on, and essentially ended up bombing out, was well beaten, and it was the shock of the tournament that he lost the way that he did. And he subsequently spoke to people about it, and I think he spoke to hypnotherapists about it as well as others. And what he figured out on their advice was that the conscious mind essentially muscled in and basically said, this is a stressful and an important situation, so I'm going to take over here, and I'm going to play this match. Whereas previously, he would have relaxed into it, allowed everything he learned in his 20 plus years of playing table tennis in his subconscious mind to play the match. And because his conscious mind didn't actually know how to play table tennis, this was the way he put it, it meant that it was like he was starting as a beginner to play the game all over again in probably the most important game of his life up to that point. So that conflict that you talk about, actually, that's what rang that bell for me and reminded me of it. He talked about that conflict too. And this is where, when we're in those stressful situations, that often the conscious mind taking over completely destroys the impact of what the subconscious could have done for us.
Yeah, 100%. That's exactly how it works, the whole thing. Or as Bruce Lipton says, we're constantly in a state of fight or flight. And when this is the case, then we never end up making the right decisions, the right moves. So the idea here is, first of all, I would say to go back and re-examine exactly what those two parts of the brain are supposed to be doing. We've talked about the fact that the subconscious mind is the programming of the computer, and the fact that the conscious mind is the monitor where you can actually see what the programming creates. The idea here is that our subconscious mind is the most powerful part of ourselves, and ironically, the least mature part of ourselves.
Okay.
Which means that, and that's why psychology calls it the child, because it is, for all intents and purposes, a child. And it only, if you have children, the child will only wants what it wants, and it doesn't. You cannot reason with a child, right? Depending on, of course, some more, some less, depending on how old they are. You can't reason with them. If you really want a child to do what you want them to do, you have to find a way that would get through to them. And that way is a similar function that we talk about when we talk about getting through to the subconscious. And the reason why we can't is because around the 7th year of age, there is this function of the conscious mind that is called a critical factor. And the critical factor is like a guard that stays in between the conscious and the subconscious mind, not letting most things pass. Most conscious things, I should say. So what does that mean? It means that if my critical factor. I'm like, let's say I'm 10 years old now, or 12, or whatever, or as my wife says, 15. Um, I would deal with a situation. Let's say you come in and ask me to give you $1,000, right? And we are operating on a conscious level now. And of course, I would say, why should I do that? Why you ask? What am I doing? I'm questioning, right? This is what the critical factor is there for, to question things. But if the critical factor questions things all the time, it only questions things that are evident to it because they operate on a conscious level. In other words, stuff that happens in everyday life. Like you're trying to park and there's somebody else over there, or you see a cop and you have to do this or you have to do that. These are all decisions we make based on this kind of back and forth communication with the outside world when it comes to the critical factor. But there are ways to get beyond that. There are a lot of things that go unnoticed, right? And those things go straight down to the subconscious. And anything that does is potentially creating new programs. And if we don't know anything about those programs, they most likely will be detrimental to our present and our future. Now, in addition to what I just said, I should say that up until the seventh year of age, that generally the critical factor is born. Anything you go to a child with, if you are someone that the child considers an authority figure, or if the child likes you for whatever reason, the parent, be it a clergyman, a teacher, or whatever you, the child will accept what you tell them as if it were God's honest truth. It will accept and won't scrutinize any of those things. This is the reason why these few years in the beginning of our lives, we suffer the most trauma, because the subconscious mind that is wide open, in essence, will accept everything in and will try to interpret it, but the subconscious mind, the child, is not very good at interpreting situations. So it will, in most cases, interpret the situations in a false manner and then build on that. So it's like, starting a foundation, not being a builder, right? And someone tells you you got to build your own house, and without knowing anything about it, you go start building a foundation on which then you hope that you can build the rest of your house. And you can imagine how that turns out.
So is it fair to say though then that and that age group up to age 7, that that could be a reason why children can be manipulated by unscrupulous people, whatever about what they tell them that goes in and they believe is true, but even what they get them to do, and some of what we've seen in the past few years, is that because the child is not questioning it, it's just accepting it. That's why it happens and it continues to happen. And then as they get older, because effectively they've been programmed to accept this, in the under 7 age group, that then they continue to accept it as they're older as well. Is
Yeah,
that?
100%. That is the
Yeah.
reason. As a matter of
Yeah.
fact, there's a saying that the Jesuits have, that give me a child before they're 7 and I'll show you a man. I mean, I suppose you say human or man, because I guess throughout history, I guess they were most interested in male
Yeah.
children, I suppose. But yeah, that's exactly what it is. You turn. It's like turning anything that is entirely undeveloped into something. You take something like a puppy, for example. It's like a similar thing. You know how they say, like, you cannot teach All dogs, new tricks.
Yeah.
This is the same idea. Whatever the dog, i.e., the child, will learn in those first years is what the programming will be that will base its behavior throughout the rest of their lives. And this is what we are trying to. Actually, we're not trying to. We are doing it. Because trying is another. We'll talk about is words are very programming. Language is software, so gotta be very careful how we use it. Yes, so this is what we're here to prevent, in essence, to help people find ways to correct the software damage, viruses, mental viruses that they might have gotten in during the first few years of their lives, correct those, and then, of course, create a brand new path ahead of them.
So if you take, for example, something that you would have learned in that early development phase up to age 7, and taken the premise behind this whole podcast about your mind trying to kill you, are we saying that something we might have learned back then, that it has continued through because we just accepted it back then and we continued to play it out, that later in life it then is working against us to the extent that it potentially kills us, but at best is undermining our efforts to be successful or to have a proper relationship or all that sort of stuff? What would be an example of that?
That is exactly what it is. No, because of all this, you see the problem with it's a problem. It's not just a problem. It could be a good thing too, depending on how you use it. The subconscious mind, this programming that comes in, is not only responsible for your behavior for the rest of your life if you don't correct it, but it gets worse. It doesn't even stay there because it has a tendency to go out there and try to find situations to match what it has initially believed the truth is. So
Okay.
he will go out there and try to verify the truth in every single way. You want an example of that? How many people do you know that keep on stepping into the same relationships? The same toxic
Sure.
relationship, a word that's being very popular these days. The same toxic relationships. They think it's that person, so they dump that person, or that person dumps them, and then they go into a similar or worse relationship. Right? Why does that happen? Because the trauma, the mental viruses that we all suffer in those years will go out there and try to grow. What does a virus do? It tries to spread. It tries to become stronger. It tries to become an entity. So these viruses will go out there and try to find anything they can, any kind of evidence to match what they believe is the truth.
Right. So, and usually, as I would see that, and the simplest example of that I've ever come across, not so much in relationship, but certainly in the way, for example, parents tell their children not to talk to strangers, that obviously is a protective message at the time. But then if the child holds it and continues to verify and validate it, then they could get to a point in their 20s or 30s where they're afraid to pick up the phone and make a sales call, or even become very agitated when they're in a room full of strangers and not knowing what to say to them or not wanting to say anything to them. They would be the examples I would have seen quite a lot of. That presumably is quite a common occurrence.
Yes, of course, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So on the basis, and I know I was intrigued when we had our conversations before around my stuff, and you mentioned it again earlier, that this is actually about training. It's about in the same way that you when you're trying to learn a piece of information, or you're trying to learn a new skill, it will be through repetition that you're constantly honing it and honing it and honing it, so that it becomes natural and to a point where you're not thinking of it. So you're learning to play the guitar, you're moving your fingers on the fretboards. It's sore, and it's you have to think about each movement, and then by repetition and constant practice, it then becomes something that you just do. So what I'm intrigued about, and I never would have associated working on your mind in the same way as you would learning to play the guitar. That was a revelation for me when you said it. What we're saying in terms of changing our programming is it's not dissimilar to learning the guitar, even at this stage in our lives. It is something that we have to do by conscious practice and conscious intention to work through the process of changing whatever programming we have. Is that fair?
Absolutely. And so then I believe that we have adequately delivered a definition of why your mind is trying to kill you. What did we touch upon today? We talked about the conscious mind and the subconscious mind, what their differences are, what their functions are, what part is responsible for what. We talked about the fact that all our behavior comes out of our subconscious mind. And there are so many ways in which our subconscious mind gets the wrong idea about many things. And because of that, it creates a lot of problems for us down the road. And if we can get in there and straighten things out, we can create a brand new life for us, not just a brand new reality. I would say this isn't a figure of speech. This is exactly how it is, because our reality in the way that we experience it is based 100% on what our subconscious mind believes it is, right? So we need to step in there and change our beliefs. It's what we call the belief systems. People talk about a belief system, but most people don't know what a belief system is. And a belief system is a program, is a subconscious program that accepts something without the need to scrutinize it, to find evidence for it.
Okay. So, and would you say that there's hope for someone like me who's 57 and obviously has a lot of bad programming to even at this stage to start to change things? And I speak for myself, but also for the potential of people listening to this who might think there's only a certain point that I can operate from. And even taking your earlier phrase, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. So do you reckon you can teach this old dog new tricks?
Absolutely. Actually, as I was saying that, I was laughing to myself because I knew that we're gonna get back to this. And I will have to say, not only is it doable, but I personally consider it a crime not to do it. You owe it to yourself. Forget who's yourself. When I talk about yourself, I talk about your spirit. You owe it to your spirit. That breath that lives in your heart, that spark. This is what made you come here and experience this life in the first place. So you owe it to yourself, to your spirit, to your soul, whatever you want to call it, to get back there and correct whatever it is that needs to be corrected. And then you'll see that everything else will unfold in a beautiful manner, because it's like going into your closet. See, your closet, that's a good example. Many people have closets that are a mess, right? Total mess. You can't find anything in there. And then all of a sudden there are people that are actually trained to go in there and organize your closet. You've heard of those people.
Yeah.
They get paid money too. So this person comes in there and organizes the closet, hardly throws anything out. And now everything is in the order it's supposed to be. And now you can find, not only can you find everything, but you step in there and you feel good, right? You feel balanced. You feel happy. There's a joy. There's a comfort that comes with that. So we find out how to step outside of what it is that we thought that was the truth about our lives and who we are, and then realize that we are way bigger, way more powerful than we ever thought. I believe that this is the best gift anyone can give to themselves, if that makes sense.
No, brilliant. I'm excited now, given that there's hope for me. And I look forward to our next episode where we'll hopefully take this another step further.
Absolutely, many steps. We're going to take this many, many steps further. And until we are going to be broadcasting every Wednesday.
Yeah, absolutely. Until next time, have a great week. Take care of yourself, and
don't let your mind kill you.
Don't let your mind kill you. Absolutely. Thanks for listening to Your Mind is Trying to Kill You with Alexandros Megas and Vincent Byrne. If you like our show and want to make sure that you don't miss an episode, then we would love if you would subscribe on Apple Podcasts or on whatever platform you're listening to us on. And you'd be doing us a big favor if you would support us by leaving a review as well. It would also be great if you would take a screenshot of this episode on your smartphone and share it on social media. So join us next Wednesday when we talk more about mind hacking and taking back control of your life. Until then, have a great week.